Careful. ready?
Not quite.
No.
What's the Indian classical performance? North Indian Hindustani music. The musicians are Pakistani and Indian. Yeah, sure. So the leader is Saqat Ali Khan. He's plays harmonium, primarily a vocalist. And vocalist is called Sham Sharani, I believe. Garasa, I forget. All of a sudden it's kind of drawn up. But 600-year tradition.
There's your vocal mic there.
So he's played here.
Yeah, I see that.
I
I think when I read, though, I might just talk. Is that okay?
It's okay for this audience, but for the stream.
Oh, for
you
the
can't hear
streaming.
it, so
Okay.
it'd be nice
So,
to have this out
but
there.
in which case, it would be better to have it out there.
Sort of
But some others, I don't want to
So we have
like talk
every
here. I want to
or
talk
5 or 6
there.
weeks we have.
So can we?
Move it. Hold on.
Just say pay without.
Okay. I'll let you do it.
Yeah. Do you have that? Pay without confirming. There's a little button that says you can go ahead and hide. That's our site. We have cartridge for. Yeah. So many questions involved in anything electronic. Everybody thinks it's so easy. Yeah, I can see it $20 bill. Okay, so yeah, so Doug has a book recently. At least he'll be telling you lots about that, working into the whole program tonight. So we got a trio for you. 2 sets, basically, finishing at 8. Then between 8 and 8:30, we sort of push everybody around and get the crew in for the next. You're welcome to stay for both shows, in which case $30 rather than 20. We've got 2 shows. And that's very wonderful 4-piece ensemble that's Filipino American folk inflected, very modern jazz, political, vigorous, which is crazy. Want to carry that over the front there? So that'll happen. We have 14 shows in 14 days right now. Fortunately, we double up some, so I'm down low right now.
I can move this basket to you.
Yeah, that's Tom Massey. We figured out whom we would fall apart here doing sound.
All right.
No
Yeah.
problem.
But then can I like sit over there when it's time to talk? Like
Yeah.
we could just swing that out or something.
Okay. So you're gonna stand up and say? I'm trying to picture what you're up to. While you're
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I can stand up. I should stand up. Yeah. So maybe can we like down here and I can stand right where you are?
Ken, are you gonna get down every time you want to make announcements?
And then just yeah, bring it up. All right.
Move this over a little bit so we can
Yeah.
get feedback.
Okay. Are you ready?
We was born ready.
Okay, get your horn ready because you're on it. I'll do an intro. unusual setting of, well, actually it's perfect in this place. Words and music. So I missed Eric's introduction, but Bird and Beckett is for, Bird is, well, you tell me, who's Bird for? Charlie Parker. And who's Beckett for? Samuel Beckett. You must have gone to Antioch. Only those people know those esoteric facts. So words and music is perfect. And so that's what tonight is about. Usually in a setting like this, you say, how's everybody doing? And I don't think you can really ask that question anymore. Because you might be doing great, but we're living in this toxic cloud. And so somehow we're all not doing quite as good as we could be. And I think we're all trying to figure out what can we do to get through it, not only personally, self-care, but what about other care? What about civic duty? What about really getting that needle back or closer, at least past the halfway point to justice? So that's why I wrote this book before all this happened, but nevertheless, it's always a timely subject that I think a lot of what is happening is perfectly logical within a certain narrative, right? It's so confusing to people like me, for example. It's like, how can you think like this? How can something like this happen? But if you follow the logic of the guiding narrative, every aspect of it is supremely logical, right? So what really needs to happen is dismantling the narrative, right? And for me, there's three narratives. One, white supremacy. Two, patriarchy. And three, capitalism. And those three are really tied together. I was just on the plane from Brazil. I actually came in at 1:30 in the morning last night and had a full day here, played at the Jewish home and did all sorts of things. And I'm totally energized because of the joy that jazz brings, right? So that part's going well, but this part, not so well. And on the plane, I saw a movie that I kind of recommend. It was a really fun, weird combination of things. It's called Soundtrack for a Coup d'etat, right? Is that how you pronounce that, French, right? Anybody seen that movie? It's really quite bizarre, but it's about Khrushchev coming to the U.S. around 1960, coming to the UN and the U.S., and he has a plan to dismantle colonialism so that all nations are independent finally from that incredible yoke of empire. And at the same time, there's all these shots of jazz musicians who are doing different things. They're just playing, some of them are talking, some of them are touring. So it's kind of like these two things are juxtaposed. And in fact, almost every jazz musician in that movie is in this book. And in fact, they stole some of my stories. I'll share one of them. But the kind of center of the whole thing was about what was going on in the Congo and about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, right? Who was freely elected and was part of this African movement where they were really looking to make the United Nations of Africa, right? Along with Nkrumah from Ghana and somebody else from, I think, Senegal. And what a beautiful man. Like, you saw, this was documentary, so you saw shots. Such a beautiful man, just a clear thinker, big smiling face. And the CIA decided that he was a threat. And so Eisenhower actually gave permission to take him down, right? So the CIA went in there and they assassinated him, right? All these lovely things that our country has done forever, that most of us never know about, right? But that is what happened. And the question is, why should they care so much about the Congo? Well, there's mining there and they need uranium for atomic bombs, right? And they needed rubber for World War I, right? And now they needed some things for our cell phones, right? So, that's why you have to put capitalism with patriarchy and white supremacy, because they're always connected. Follow the money, follow the money, follow the money, right? Nobody would be interested in Congo if it wasn't for that. Just let the people do whatever they want. But that's what it was. And by the way, how many people ever heard of King Leopold? Right. So now it's a little bit more known. But I read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. And he tells this hilarious story, kind of weird, hilarious story, where he and his friends were going around dancing for parties. And at one point, one of them went into the middle and they were clapping along and they said, "Go Hitler, because that was his nickname. And they were performing at a Jewish school. So the people were outraged, and he said, "We didn't know who Hitler was. Nobody knew who Hitler was. He just was some weird guy in Europe, so we just thought it was a cool name. But King Leopold, we know about him, right? And King Leopold killed more people than Hitler did, right? And again, it was all about follow the money, like get the money from them. So these are the narratives that run throughout this book, is that central narrative of white supremacy with a little bit of a nod to the capitalism and the patriarchy. The FBI. Sorry. I knew I couldn't talk for long. Right. They're after me. So the book is saying, look, if we want to dismantle the narrative, number one, you have to know the narrative, right? You have to know what it is. You have to recognize it. You have to see how it works. You have to have some sense of why it worked, why it's there. And you have to have some understanding about why it's still with us and why all this is happening, because we have never set down that narrative. And I'll give you my first example in a moment. So, but the people to start with are the young people, right? Because we failed, we did what we could, and we're still going to keep doing what we can. But this generation, we didn't get it. Not enough of us got it. Antioch people, yeah. San Francisco school people, yeah. But not enough, right? So we need to tell the kids the real story. And once they know the story, then they have the possibility of making a choice about what they value and what they are going to do. But they have to know the story, and they have to recognize the story and see how it works and say, there it is again. It wasn't an accident that the police did that then. It wasn't just a bad person doing something bad, and if only everybody would be nicer to each other, that would solve everything. No, it would be nice, but that's not it. So they have to recognize, there it is again, there it is again, there it is again, and tell other people about it, right? Because that's what the whole thing is fed on ignorance, right? Purposefully perpetrated ignorance, so nobody knows what the story is, so the people in power who benefit from it can keep doing it. At the same time, it's heavy stuff, right? It's heavy for us, and it's heavy for kids. So we better put a little joy into it. We don't have to put joy into it. There is joy in resisting oppression, and there is joy in working for justice. And there's a hell of a lot of joy in jazz. That first song just makes me happy every time I hear it. And because I'm a teacher, I'm going to have to ask you questions. And if you get the highest point on the test, I'm going to give you a $5 discount on the book. All right. Does anybody know what the name of that first piece was? You probably forgot what it even was like. It was this one. Right? Anybody have a guess? Who said that? Oh, come on, you can't play. Oh, that was Eric. But that's absolutely right. It's called Strutting with Some Barbecue. Do you know who wrote it? That's right. A woman piano player named Lil Hardin, who also became Louis Armstrong's second wife, right? And she was a woman piano player in the 1920s, and in fact quite instrumental to his career, because she's the one who convinced him to go to New York and leave King Oliver. So she wrote this in this old-fashioned kind of New Orleans style. And then how about the second piece? Anybody know what that was? You're making me walk over. All right, the second one was... Little 12-bar blues. It was called Eric. No, he's busy.
I forget. Is it Mingus tune?
It is a Mingus tune. He gave away the.
Yeah, what's that thing called?
Has
That's the one I drove across town with a broken arm, like that, going in my head the whole way.
yeah. It has something to do with a place in New York.
Oh, nightmare! Something in Times Square.
Yeah, nostalgia in Times Square. Yeah, Jason's getting close. I give you 2 points there. All right. So, there's 23 musicians that I wrote about here, and here's your other test: is I'm going to ask how many of them, how many of the names of the people you recognize. And by the way, absolutely no shame if you say I never heard of any of them. Right? It means your culture failed you, your school failed you, the media failed you to not introduce you to these extraordinary geniuses, right? So here we go. Just throw your hands up if you ever heard of him. Louis Armstrong. All right. Bessie Smith. Duke Ellington. Billy Strayhorn. That's a card. Benny Goodman. Billie Holiday. Ella Fitzgerald. Marilyn Monroe and Bob Hope. You're thinking, what? Right. But by the way, both of them were singers. And they're there as kind of white allies of jazz musicians. All right. But they are both singers. And Bob Hope was a tap dancer, too. All right. Nat King Cole. Frank Sinatra. Sammy Davis Jr. Okay, watch this one. Hazel Scott. Yeah. Only Karen, because she came to the last time when I talked, and she learned about her. Hazel Scott. I'm actually not going to read about her tonight, but I'll tell you a little bit about her. Charlie Parker. Thelonious Monk, Charles Mingus, Dr. Billy Taylor, Nina Simone, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Dave Brubeck, Dizzy Gillespie. Watch out for this one, Melba Liston. Okay. Yeah. And that's it. Those are the people that you can keep company with for the rest of your life and introduce these kids to. How many of these people you think kids know? Ask a kid on the street. Two. Yeah. Did you know some of them? Yeah. Good for you. Do you know when his birthday was?
It wasn't really the 4th of July.
It wasn't really the 4th of July, but he said it was, so his mythological birthday was the 4th of July, and that's how you could always remember it. The 4th of July, 1900, because it was the symbol of independence. And Louis Armstrong was the beginning of this freedom of musical expression that had never existed in quite that way before. But then they found a little piece of paper that said August 4th, 1901, right? But sometimes mythology is truer than true. Would you?
I was going to say, how about his nickname? Who remembers Louis Armstrong?
Chops.
Yeah.
Satchmo, also Pops, yeah, and also Dippermouth. He had 3 nicknames. That's when he was a kid. Right. Okay, so I better get going here because I could go on for a long time like this. But the first 2 musicians that I want to read a little bit about are Louis Armstrong, because of the connection with Lil Harding, and he recorded that piece with King Oliver, and then with Charles Mingus. Now, you may say, why those 2? Like, they're far apart, and you'll see why in a moment. But meanwhile, I just want to read a little bit what I wrote on the back of the cover about my goal for this book, because it really is threefold. Number 1, children need to know these artists just because they're extraordinary geniuses who deserve recognition, right? And Taylor Swift would not exist without them, right? None of the people they listen to would have existed without them. So you need to know who to thank, right? But there are also people that can give you a lifetime of comfort and uplift in many, many ways from the music that they created, which luckily we have preserved with recordings and so on. So number 1 is to make sure people know their own American geniuses, right? This seems like a no-brainer. In Salzburg, there isn't a single person that you have to say, do you think you should know about Mozart, right? Not a single person, because you can't walk 2 blocks without Mozart candy, Mozart pencils, Mozart underwear. You know, it's like they're so proud of Mozart. But in Toledo, Ohio, where I went to give a workshop, nobody knew who Art Tatum was, except the black people in that town, where they built a library, the Art Tatum Library, right? It's shameful. This is our purposeful, perpetuated ignorance. Okay, so number one, the kids need to know about them. But number two, they need to know what these people went through to create the music they created, and how they all shared similar stories about being affected by systemic racism. The phone's going to ring now. I said that word, right? I'm using critical race theory. Right? So here's what I wrote. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all American school children learned something about our great American art form of jazz? If they not only listened to and played their music, but also heard the stories of our American jazz geniuses. And if by hearing these stories, they also came to understand something of how systemic racism has hurt and continues to hurt us all, not just the people who are directly affected by it. It hurts us all of us, right? It hurts the haters. It hurts the people not talking about the haters. It hurts us all. This would help inspire them to begin the long walk toward justice, accompanied by the joy of jazz. So jazz, joy, and justice is the trio that will help us as we stand at the crossroads between education and catastrophe. This is a quote by H.G. Wells. We are at the crossroads between education and catastrophe. He wrote it almost 100 years ago. I just started a podcast based on another book I wrote. Yeah. And in the very first episode, I use that quote. We are in a race between education and catastrophe, and we're losing at the moment, right? The judges have rigged the race. You know, they're crippling us at our knees, you know, and we're doing pretty poorly. But there's always hope, and it begins with the first step towards real education. So jazz, joy, and justice, the trio that will help us as we stand at the crossroads. It sings out the songs of our triumph and our shame, our joy and our pain, our happiness and our sorrow, our yesterday and tomorrow. I like that sentence. If you love jazz, find out some of the hidden stories of your favorite musicians. If you love justice, discover how jazz musicians did so much more than entertain us. And if you need some joy in your day, listen to the music examples suggested in these pages. So the way the book is laid out, there's a stamp of the person, and if there's not a stamp, there's a drawing. A short little story about one or two things that this person had to endure that they didn't deserve. Then listening suggestions. Now, I couldn't do the little blue thing that you just put your phone on and boom, YouTube shots up. So you actually have to do this amazing thing. You have to type like 6 words, right? But don't neglect that part, because that's really at the center. The kids are not going to care about Billie Holiday unless they know Billie Holiday and hear Billie Holiday and feel like, wow, this is a person I want to know more about, right? So these videos are just some of many things out on YouTube, but I did a lot of research to try to pick ones that would be good. And then the third part is reflection. In other words, this is not entertainment where it's like, oh yeah, wow, I learned that, that's cool. Now what's for dinner? What's on tonight, you know? No, reflection. What would you have done in this situation? Have you been in a situation similar to that? What did you do? You know, what do you wish you had done differently? So I'm putting it back on this student, whether they're in 5th grade or they're 95 years old, you know, to look at the story and to look at all these stories and say, now that you know this, what are you going to do? And the first thing that I would suggest is you tell other people the stories, right? And you just don't, when the conversation is talking about the next thing that you really don't need to talk about, do you have iPhone 10? Do you have iPhone? Right? Have you heard Taylor's latest thing? Yeah. Say, great, but let me tell you a story. Do you know what happened to Louis Armstrong? in 1957, right? Let's find out. Louis Armstrong is actually in the first story, and in the first story, I'm not going to read it to you, but the brief synopsis of it is that he's playing in 1931 in some club in Austin, Texas, and this high school senior, might have been a college freshman, comes in with his friends looking for girls at the dance, typical thing that you would do. And he goes in and he hears this music, and it's one of those moments when time stops, right? And he describes how he felt like he was lifted up into the heavens. And then he looks up on the bandstand, and there's a black man playing that on the trumpet. And everything that he had been taught by his parents, by his teachers, by his minister, by the television, by the radio, by the books, everything he had been taught, which is that these people are okay in their place. And he said, but what was the place of somebody like this, right? And it just blew the whole lie wide open. And he went on to become one of the people who was instrumental in the Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. He became a lawyer because of that moment. And Louis Armstrong probably never even knew about it. All he was doing was just expressing his own genius self. So that's one way you can help, is pay attention to your soulful genius and follow that, especially when it's something that uplifts people and uplifts yourself. You never know what that can do. And Louis Armstrong was criticized as being kind of a big entertainer with a big smile. Later, when Black Power came in, the people were just saying, oh, he's Uncle Tom. But he knew the score, right? So this is Louis Armstrong now in 1957. I'm writing this for so a fifth grader could understand it, but I'm not talking down to them. And this is really for every single age group above that and some ages below that. So here I go. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself one more time. So Brown versus Board of Education was a law now that schools may not be segregated. Did it work? Hell no, right? So in 1957, when 9 brave black young people went to the Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, hand chosen to say, I'm going to be brave enough to make that law do what it says, they were repelled by the soldiers that Governor Faubus threw at them and said, you can't come in. So they petitioned Eisenhower, and Eisenhower had this good old boys meeting with Faubus, and nothing changed. And then later on, Eisenhower changed his mind and said, no, you actually have to let them in. I'm sending the National Guard to bring them in, right? So this is the main point. You have to change the laws like that law. However, it is never even close to enough if you don't change the narrative, right? So the law says you must do this, but the narrative says that those white women could scream at that young woman, Elizabeth, with hatred pouring out of their face because they could not face the fact that they had been told lies for over 100 years. That slavery never ended, it just changed its character, and therefore the law was not even close to enough, right? And even this integration was a big milestone, but then the school shut down the next year because they couldn't handle it. 2 of those people, by the way, came to the San Francisco School to talk, Melba Beals and Minnie Jean Brown Chickey. So we got the first-hand stories for them, and believe me, it was not pretty, people, right, what happened there. All right, here's back to Louis Armstrong. Remember how Louis Armstrong indirectly influenced the desegregation of schools by opening up future lawyer Charlie Black's eyes? Brown versus Board of Education was an important decision from the Supreme Court, finally making the segregation of schools illegal. But just because a new law is put in place doesn't mean things immediately change. By 1957, most schools were still segregated, so civil rights leaders decided to put the law to the test and enrolled 9 black students in Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas, ordered the state National Guard to prevent them from entering, and President Eisenhower met with the governor. After the meeting, nothing changed. The students were still prevented from entering the school. Now, Louis Armstrong was one of jazz's first musical geniuses, but he also saw himself as an entertainer whose job it was to make people happy. So early on in his career, his manager, Joe Glazer, told him he looked too serious on stage and he should smile more. So his broad grin became part of his performance style, but by the 1940s and 50s, the younger black musicians criticized him for being an Uncle Tom, a figure in a story who was always bowing and smiling to his master. I'm trying to explain this to fifth graders who maybe never heard these stories before, unless they were in my daughter Talia's class, right? The new jazz musicians like Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk were not concerned about entertaining the white audience, and they were more concerned about inviting the audience to rise to the high level of the serious music they were making. But of course, Louis Armstrong, like every black person in this country then and now, was well aware of the barbs of racism. Perhaps he felt that by making people happy in his shows, they would not be able to dehumanize black people, as in the story of Charlie Black. But when he was performing in North Dakota at the time of this Little Rock incident, he decided to speak out directly. Here's how it happened. Anybody know the story already? Okay, so this is something that's really going to be satisfying for me, that there are many people, like you all put your hands up, I know all these musicians, but chances are you don't know these stories, right? And I had to work hard to find some of them, right? And maybe you do know some of them and you know others that I don't know. But this is why I want to accent this part, because jazz is in every school in the United States on some level. We're done. It's so serious now. Everybody loves jazz. Not really, but every school has a jazz band, every university, every college, every conservatory. So it's not just this thing cast off to the side. It's right in the center of our education, but it's all about playing your instrument and playing the notes on the page, right? And us folks here, three of these, us five pentatonics, went to a school in Fresno where it was a mid-school jazz band. I said, so what do you guys know about Louis Armstrong? Nothing. You know about Miles Davis? Never heard of him. They didn't know a single thing about the jazz musicians whose music they were playing. So just because you're playing jazz doesn't mean you know anything about this. That's why I'm here. All right. Here's how it happened. Louis was staying at the Dakota Hotel in Grand Forks, North Dakota, when a journalism student named Larry Lubenow talked the bell captain in letting him deliver dinner to Louis in his room so he could interview him. And once inside, Larry introduced himself and began chatting with Louis. And when he asked him about the recent events in Little Rock, Louis replied, "It's getting almost so bad a colored man hasn't gotten any country. The president has no guts." Right? So this guy snuck in this room, and now he's interviewing Louis. He then said that the State Department had sponsored a trip for him to the Soviet Union as an ambassador of goodwill. And he decided he was going to cancel the tour, adding, "The way they're treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell." Right? This is happy Louis Armstrong. The story was printed. And there was another part where before he printed it, this journalist showed it to Louis, and he said, "Is that okay?" He said, "Solid, man. Print it." Right? Story is printed, got attention throughout the country. 1 week later, President Eisenhower declared that the law cannot be ignored by any individual or mob of extremists, and ordered the National Guard to protect the 9 children as they entered the school. Right? Now, it's not necessarily cause and effect. We don't know that, oh, Louis Armstrong said this, I better pay attention. I'm sure it helped, though, and it certainly drew attention to it. And Louis then sent a telegram to Eisenhower. "Daddy, if and when you decide to take those little Negro children personally into Central High School along with your marvelous troops, please take me along. Oh, God, it would be such a great pleasure, I assure you. May God bless you, President. You have a good heart." Right? So he was thanking the president for doing that. Nobody will ever know if Louis' newspaper interview changed the president's mind, but many suspect it made a difference. And so the man who once helped change the law about school segregation simply by playing his trumpet in a Texas club now helped make the law stick by speaking out courageously in public. And, of course, after Louis did that, many of his gigs after that were canceled. Right? No, we didn't like it that you spoke out, so you can't play here, you can't play here. So this was another thing, that you speak out, we're going to get you. And so people had to decide my career or tell the truth. All right. I'm not going to do Charles Mingus now because it was really long, but it's the reason I put him together with Louis Armstrong is because his response to that 57 thing was he composed a thing called The Fables of Faubus, a tune that was criticizing Governor Faubus, and it had lines like 2, 4, 6, 8. They brainwash and they teach you hate. And Columbia Records recorded it in 1959, but they did not allow those words to be recorded. Right? Too radical. But then there was a second recording on another label in 1960 that finally those things are done. So check it out, The Fables of Faubus. All right, these guys are falling asleep, so I better let them play a little bit more.
Oh, that's The Fables of Faubus. Yeah. Of course we should have played that, but we didn't have time to do it.
Play it now.
He just played it. All right, now here's the great thing about jazz and heavy stuff is that it's like, yeah, that's hard, but then you play some music and it's like, oh, that feels better. So the next two people, Billie Holiday and Bessie Smith. Let's do Bessie Smith first.
in Birmingham have a little of that.
Saint something.
Saint something.
Saint son of city.
Louis.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. It was the second written blues by W.C. Handy. First one was called Memphis Blues. So that's St. Louis Blues, but I arranged it a little differently than Bessie Smith sang it. But Bessie Smith sang that with Louis Armstrong, accompanying her on trumpet. All right. Before we get to Bessie, we have Billy, Bessie and Billy. And again, we could have chosen the song that I mostly talk about in the story, which, if you could probably guess, is a song called Strange Fruit. But we're going to do another song that Billie Holiday actually wrote. She didn't write a lot, but she did write this song. Beautiful ballad. I think it's break time. You are right. So I don't have to read all the stories. Some of them I could tell in a shorter way. But when we come back, we'll find out a little bit about Bessie and Billy and move on from there. So 10 minutes to buy every book in the store, but especially that book, which I can sign if you like. Let's clap for Marty and Sam. All right. Short break, 10 minutes, 12. song in the first part. But that tune is, who sang that? Anybody know?
A lot of people.
A lot of people. Who sang it in a movie? In a movie. Yeah, that's a good question. I forget the name of the movie.
Well, Nat King Cole. let's
Nat
just
King
say
Cole,
it.
that was it. Nat King Cole. Do you remember the name of the movie?
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Well, it'll come back. So Nat King Cole sang that. The tune before, what was that? Who wrote it?
Duke Ellington.
Duke Ellington, of course, but not
Billy
Billy Strayhorn. All right. So I think I'm not going to read. I'll just tell a couple of stories and then so those guys don't have to wait so long. So, but back to Bessie Smith. In some ways, the story about Bessie Smith, it's I did this chronologically, so she's actually second after Louis Armstrong, and it's a little bit unsatisfying because it tells a story about how she got in an auto accident and she was refused entrance into the all-white hospital and died from the injuries because of that. But it actually wasn't quite true. It was, I think, John Hammond it was Edward Albee who said that in a play called The Death of Bessie Smith. But it was a little bit of an urban legend because no driver ever would have taken her to a white hospital knowing that they wouldn't accept her. So the revised story is that she did go to a black hospital, but it was further away. And who knows? We don't know whether she would have been saved. But I did say, first of all, it could have been true. And secondly, that there are other stories of such segregation practices of Jim Crow that were fatal. In 1937, the very same year as Bessie's accident, Billie Holiday's father, Clarence Holiday, was a jazz guitarist, and he fell ill with a lung disorder while he was touring Texas. And the lung disease came from exposure to mustard gas while, guess what? Serving his country in World War I. Right? Actually, one of the alum students from our school, Chad Williams, wrote a book about W.E. Du Bois, about Boyce, and he about how he encouraged everybody back then, all black soldiers, to fight for World War I, thinking that when they came back, finally they would be accepted, and even he was proven to be quite naive and later had to recant what happened because it was the same thing as World War II. In Dave Brubeck, I talk about this. He had an integrated jazz band in the Army called the Wolf Pack. And when he came back, they all met for a reunion in Texas at a restaurant. And, of course, the black people in the band couldn't come in the restaurant, right? And, all the white soldiers got GI Bills. The black soldiers did not, right? So, and Sammy Davis Jr., another one that we tell a story of here, joined the Army, and he was beaten every single day by Southern white soldiers who broke his nose and bruised his face. And he said his father had protected him from racism, and it was his first exposure to the fact that it's like, wow, what's going on here, right? So these stories were everywhere. The way I describe Bessie to the kids is, Bessie Smith was a hard-living, hard-loving gospel preacher of the blues. She had a powerful presence and a powerful voice that reached down into the gut and let her listeners know that life can be mean and love can throw you to the ground and nobody gets out without bumps and bruises. But you can wrestle your blues and get on top of it by singing the blues. And that was the healing tonic that people bought when they bought their ticket to Bessie's shows or shelled out their hard-earned money for one of her records. All right? So this is something we would all do well to remember, that the origin of jazz is survival music. That the only reason I believe that millions of people could survive 400 years of unimaginable brutality and terrorism was music. That's what got them through the day, from the field hollers to the work songs to the blues, that when they were looking for work and they couldn't find any, they had time with their guitar to just sing about it, and boom, now we got something. And by singing the blues, by talking it out, and then by sharing it with other people, then you don't have it, the blues, as much, it becomes a healing tonic, Sorry, my wife doesn't like it when I say but you do know, or you should know. But the blues could not solve everything in the segregated South. What if you were a black person in need of urgent medical care and the closest hospital was for whites only and refused to treat you? And so that was the setup for the Bessie Smith story. Now, Billie Holiday was a hard one to write because I'm writing to fifth grade children. And how can I really tell the story about what actually happened to her? Do you know the story? Louis Armstrong had an incredibly difficult childhood. He was, his father left him. His mother was probably a part-time prostitute, and raising the kid on two kids on her own, and scrubbing steps to try to get money. And lots of times they didn't have enough money in the bank. They lived in a place that was so violent it was called the Battleground, and and Louis had to work when he was 7 years old selling coal. And he ended up meeting this Jewish family, the Karnofskys, and they actually befriended him and gave him some meals. And he wore a cross of David for the rest of his life in honor of those people. And also, Star of David. Sorry, not the cross of David. Yeah, no, I knew that did not feel right. Thank you for correcting me. The cross of David, right? The Star of David. Thank you. And something's wrong there. And they actually bought him his first cornet. And then he, when he was 11 years old, he went out singing on New Year's Eve with his quartet. And everybody was popping off firecrackers. He got a gun with blanks in it, and he shot in the air. And these two arms hugged him, and he looked up, and there was a white policeman. And he said, "You're going to jail," which was the Colored Waifs home. And he went to the Colored Waifs home for 2 years. Then when he came out, he couldn't go back to school because he had to work, so he never finished fifth grade. This man who influenced the entire world with his singing, he was the icon just about of the 20th century. And then he did marry, the first person he married was a prostitute, or as some people tell me I should say a sex worker, And she came after him with a razor one day when she got mad and cut up his hat that he saved 6 months for. So when I talk to kids about Louis Armstrong, I don't tell them who I'm talking about. I say, you're a social worker, and this comes across your page. What hope do you have for this kid? Right? What hope do you have for this kid? Didn't finish fifth grade, is violent, he's poor, he's in a violent neighborhood, he had to go to jail. What hope do you have for this kid? It's like, yeah, write him off. There's no hope for him. And it's like, so you think you had a bad day when your computer doesn't boot up fast. And, this kid had quite a bit of resilience and ended up becoming the most extraordinary voice of jazz in the 20th century. And when he talked about his childhood, he did not say, "Oh, man, I'm so glad I got out of there. Now I have my mansion on the hill like Elvis." He said, "Sometimes I wonder if I was better off living the way I was back in New Orleans. I mean, it's fine, all this big mucky muck traveling, meeting the kings and the queens and being all high on the horse and grandioso. But," he said, "man, I sure had a ball growing up in New Orleans. There was music all around you." So he loved it. He was not putting it down, And he ended up living in a modest house in Queens. And his wife, at some point, his fourth wife, said, "Come on, you could have a penthouse in Manhattan." So he followed her there, and there was the doorman. Everybody's Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Armstrong. And he went up and looked at this fancy penthouse, and he said, "Man, I want to be back in the neighborhood with the kids. None of this phony stuff for me." And we visited his house. You can do it in Queens, and it's in a very modest neighborhood, So is Louis saying, "Thanks for telling that story, Doug." And it is July 4th, 1900. It's not that other one. So that was Louis Armstrong. So it was a pretty rough childhood, right? By the way, his house, if you want to go see his house in New Orleans, you can't, because they decided to build a freeway and pave it over, right? That's a whole other story. It's about the way freeways decimated all the poor areas and the black areas, and still do, So, but Billie Holiday's story was even harder than Louis Armstrong's, because she was raped as a child, and she herself worked as a prostitute when she was 11, 12 years old, right? It just could not have been more brutal. And she was blamed. You know, the guy who did it got away with it, and she was blamed for it. You know, the way the patriarchy does that lovely thing. You know, so it was pretty brutal. But while she was working, she used to listen to Louis Armstrong records and sing along with him. And then she went to a club when she was 17 and said, you know, can I sing a song? And the guy said, yeah, go ahead, but, you know, I'm not going to give you a job. So she sang her song, and while she was singing the song, she closed her eyes. And she said when she opened her eyes, everybody in the place was crying. And she said, oh, I have something. I got something, right? So, yeah. Wait, say it again? What song was she singing? Ella Fitzgerald had a similar story where she sang at the Apollo, and that song was Judy, but I'm not sure what Billy's is. It's probably in her autobiography, which I highly recommend, because she went on to, of course, have an extremely difficult life with drug addiction, and she ended up being arrested on her deathbed. This person who was more famous or as famous as Marilyn Monroe, you know, was being hounded by the narcotics because they treated drugs as a crime rather than an illness, right? And of course, it was something the mafia profited by, and the first ones for free. So, and never really knew true love. Listen to her sing "Love for Sale" by Cole Porter. She said, "I've known every kind of love, but true love," you know. So she had a brutal thing, but in her autobiography, I don't think I included here. Yeah, I don't. She has the most beautiful thing about her dream was to have a house where all the kids that nobody wanted would come to her. And she said, I would love them. And I would yell at them when they were bad. I wouldn't let them get away with anything, but I would let them know that they were wanted, and I would love them, you know, and I would cook with them and I'd sing with them. It's just really, really I was in tears just reading her autobiography. So I just said Billie Holiday had a childhood as hard as anyone could imagine. Alongside her personal trauma was a constant assault of racism and sexism, but yet with an inner strength and courage far beyond the capacity of most people to reach, she used her voice to not only survive her own sorrow, but to touch millions with the beauty of her singing. She could take the most simple song and turn it into something that tugs at your heartstring. And most of the songs were about love, love found, love lost, love that never knocked on the door, love that rang the doorbell and no one was home. And since everyone listening to her music had either been visited by love or had dreamed of love, it was easy for them to relate to the lyrics and enjoy the melodies. So in 1939, when Abel Meeropol, a Jewish high school teacher who wore the Star of David, gave her a song to sing, she hesitated because it was not a song about romantic love. Abel had seen a photograph of a lynching, and he wrote a song called Strange Fruit in response to it. As Billy describes it, I was scared people would hate it. The first time I sang it, I thought it was a mistake and that I was right being scared. There wasn't even a patter of applause when I finished. And then one lone person began to clap nervously. And suddenly, everyone was clapping. And I came off, went upstairs, changed into street clothes, and when I came down, they were still applauding. Right? Isn't that powerful? Right? You speak out way beyond what anybody would expect you to do. And by the way, if nobody applauded, she might have kept singing the song anyway. But sometimes all it takes is that one person to start. And somebody says, oh, maybe that's okay. And then two people, and then three people. And then it's like, yeah, you hit it. Right? In another story here, she's singing it, and some guy is heckling her, and Bob Hope says, you go ahead and sing that song. I'm going to take care of that son of a bitch. Excuse my French. So he was a wonderful, wonderful ally. Nat King Cole, who's that song, When I Fall in Love, he was famous for singing a song called Unforgettable, and he was. His silky voice soothed the listener's ear and smoothed out the rough edges of their day. He sang for black audiences and white, and you would think his white fans would change their feelings about race. in the presence of his gifted genius. But you would be wrong. Except for a few people like Charlie Black, the story of the imagined proper places for whites and blacks was so deeply embedded in people that they saw no contradiction whatsoever between enjoying Nat King Cole's music and refusing him entrance to the restaurant. Just as everybody in this country is cheering for their sports team. Go LeBron, go Steph, go, yeah, you make our team win, but I'm still going to vote for this guy who's going to put you down. Right? Yeah, we're the greatest. Yeah, we won the basketball at the Olympics. Like, who's we? Pretty much an all-black team, right? But so we love to cheer these people on until they, take a knee. And then it's like, that's the end of your career. But the other white guy with privilege and money can do the Nazi salute. Nothing happens. Right? These are not accidents. This is the way this narrative works in this country. Even worse than the thing about denying Nat King Cole entrance to a restaurant, the man who entered our homes and hearts each Christmas evoking chestnuts roasting on an open fire once bought a home for his family in Los Angeles, only to wake up one morning to a burning cross on his lawn. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan was not only in the Deep South, but also in Los Angeles. This was not the open fire Nat had in mind when he sang that song. And when a neighbor told him, "We don't want any undesirables here," Nat gently replied, "Neither do I. If I see anybody undesirable coming in here, I'll be the first to let you know and complain." Right? So you see all the strategies that people have, right? Some people were just like, I'm going to tell you to your face this wrong. I'm going to make a little joke of it. I'm going to sue Pan Am Airlines, which Ella Fitzgerald did when they kicked her out of first class because some person didn't like a black person sitting in their first class section. And she lost 2 days of her concert in Australia. She sued Pan Am Airlines. She won the suit. Yeah. So there's lots of ways to respond to all of this. The story I told in here is about him performing in Birmingham to all-white audience. And the Ku Klux Klan had organized for about 100 people to storm the stage and drag him off the stage and probably lynch him, but when the time came, only 3 of them showed up to do it. But they did. They stormed the stage and they dragged him off. And luckily, the police intervened in his favor and took those people away. But he did suffer an injury from that. And after that, he said, "I can't understand it. I have not taken part in any protests, nor have I joined an organization fighting segregation. Why should they attack me?" So he continued to perform for segregated audiences and received a lot of criticism from the NAACP until finally he realized, yeah, I better get on that team. And he did, and he ended up helping plan the March on Washington in 1963. So Unforgettable has a double meaning, at once a lovely long love song and the word that describes the ongoing presence of white supremacy in our country, especially for the people of color who are hurt by it, right? It's unforgettable for them. They do not have the luxury of forgetting about it. The video I asked them to look at. One of the videos is Nat singing Unforgettable as a duet with his daughter 25 years after he died. So in other words, she sings it and he has a video and she sings the video so that she could sing a duet with her dad. And if you could watch that and go away with a dry eye, get some therapy. Because it's so beautiful, right? And many pictures of her as a girl with her dad, right? So that was Nat King Cole. And then the A Train about Billy Strayhorn was, I'll just read the opening thing and then I'm going to call the guys back out here. The quick story about Billy Strayhorn is that Duke Ellington was really tired after a concert and somebody said, "Hey, there's a kid here. I want you to hear him play piano." And Duke's lying in bed. He said, "Oh, come on, leave me alone." And he just the guy came in and started playing piano, and Duke said, "Whoa, who is that guy?" And they became lifelong colleagues and friends. But here's the introduction in Billy Strayhorn. Imagine being a black man in a racist society. Imagine a man loving a man in a homophobic culture. Imagine a black man loving a white man in a country where gay and interracial marriage is illegal. Imagine being a sensitive artist in a nation that wanted men to be macho males and ruthless businessmen. Imagine an extraordinary friendship with a fellow artist who often got the credit for the things you created. Welcome to the life of Billy Strayhorn. Right? He dealt with all of that. And he really did kind of come out as a gay man in the 40s at a time where, like, you didn't do that, right? And he did have a white lover at some point. And he, you know, he and Duke Ellington had a very lovely relationship, but Duke really did take credit for a lot of his pieces, you know. You know, just everybody associated it with Duke because it was his orchestra. So Take the A Train is one of them, Satin Doll is another one. But Billy Strayhorn also wrote Lush Life and a lot of songs about flowers, like Passion Flower and, you know, say it again?
Lotus Blossom.
Lotus Blossom, that's a beautiful one, yeah. Many, many sensitive titles. He also was, there was a doctor, Duke Ellington's doctor, that often they would have meals at his house, and Billy Strayhorn was there one time, and somebody brought in a friend, and it was Martin Luther King. And Billy Strayhorn said, "Come on into the kitchen, help me cook." And they did, and had an ongoing friendship from their time in the kitchen together. All right, so that was Billy Strayhorn. But you see, every single person, something happens. And, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. But every single person, something happens, and none of it is an accident. All of it is completely within the logic of what it was. But I'm asking the kids to hear the stories and know them, and then also notice how the people reacted to it. So you have many different ways to choose. You know, you see Miles had a very different way to react to it. And I think we'll just do Miles and Monk. Maybe have time for one more at the end. And then what do you want to do first? Monk? Let's do Monk. Are you here, Marty?
Yeah, I'm right here, man.
It's the felonious Monk. Well, Marty I played with that flower piano, but Sam went away for a year. I played with him for over a year. We're 3/5 of the pentatonics. We're the tritonics. Let's, oh God, it's time. 5 minutes? Three.
We gotta change over this stage.
We got to change over, okay. I wanted to end with getting you all singing a song, but that's okay, I'll stop there. But just very briefly, the monk story is him traveling with this woman, Nika Koenigswater, this baroness who loved jazz and ended up giving a lot of money to it, and was very good friends with Monk and Charlie Parker. And she was traveling with Monk, and of course the cops see a black man and a white woman, so they pull him over, and they found a little marijuana. She says it's mine, but they said no, we're taking him in. So they pulled him out. He held onto the door handle like resisting, and they started beating his hands. Right, Monk, who was a piano player. Right, and then they took away his cabaret card again, so he could not work for years and years in New York City. And on he went, and all he said, I'm just making music to bring people together. And the Miles story is even funnier because more interesting. Well, there's two. Is one, he's outside of his club on a break, smoking a cigarette, and policeman says, move along. And he points up to the marquee that says Miles. He says, that's me. I work here. And the policeman said, I don't care who you are. I told you to move along. Gets a cop to come in, and they start beating the crap out of him. And they take him in, and you see photos of him bleeding, right? And they arrest him for resisting arrest, right? And then, but Miles did not take anything from anybody as much as he could. So he was with Cicely Tyson, and he was invited by Reagan to a White House dinner. And he was in the car with her and Quincy Jones, and there was Fred McMurray and Fred Astaire's widow, I think, or something like that. There were three white people. And either Fred Astaire's wife or maybe Fred McMurray's wife turned around and said to Miles, your mammy must be awful proud that you are going to the White House. And all the black people in the car said, whoa, you did not say that to Miles. And Miles said, listen, lady, my mama had more dignity in her little pinky than you have in your whole body, and nobody uses that word mammy anymore. My mother was a music teacher, my father was a dentist. I don't ever want to hear you say that again. And she went, oh, I'm sorry. And then he was at the dinner, and Nancy Reagan turns to him and said, so what have you done? Like, who are you? And he says, oh, just changed the music 5 or 6 times. What have you done? And this is the polite version. Besides sleep with the president. So, really different from Nat King Cole. Miles. All right, so we're just getting warmed up, here, but Sammy Davis Jr., amazing story. They're all amazing stories, and they're all depressing stories, but they're all hopeful stories. They're all of it at once. So pass them on to the kids, and make sure to watch the videos with them, and don't forget to include the Nicholas Brothers tap dancing. That's something that I did put in the book. Hopefully there'll be a Jazz, Joy, and Justice Part 2, but not with this publishing company. That has not done very well. Lastly, if anybody hasn't seen the film yet, The Secret Song, that'll give you some hope in these days. They just showed it in Brazil, where I was on Monday, and got a standing ovation in Brazil.
All right.
And, thank you to Bert and Beckett, to Eric. Thank you all for coming, and spread the word, and listen to the music, and we shall be in touch. All right.